le CV. Seulement quand les étudiants vont venir servir votre page, je vais prendre des photos. Pour le pitch, silence. Après ça, pendant la période de questions, je vais prendre des photos. Et les gens vont regarder le pitch. Vous allez voir les
ça va être des équipes, ça?
Non, je vais sélectionner ces équipes.
Bonjour, Louis-Philippe Lavoie, CPA auditeur CA. Je travaille chez Malette et je suis aussi auditeur, excusez-moi, chargé de cours à l'UQAM.
Bonjour, Sophie Bergeron-Leblanc, je suis CPA CA, puis je travaille à l'Ordre des CPA.
As a kid, I remember attending my first hockey game. The excitement and the energy in the stadium was amazing and powerful. It really excites and makes you want to achieve the best for yourself. Our new client, MK, is building the stadium for this very purpose. And as their auditors, we want to ensure that they can build a stadium to their best ability. Good afternoon, Isabel. We are your audit team. I am Richard, your audit specialist. I'm joined by Abrar, audit specialist as well, and Sohel, your accounting specialist. So what we'll be discussing today is how can we prepare for this upcoming audit, and specifically address client concerns. So we want to see if there's compliance with ASPE first of all. We want to look at the audit plan and procedures we're going to be undertaking. And we want to have some control suggestions for the client to improve their current situation so that we can have more effective audits in the future. As well, we want to go over best practices and the governance situation. So to begin, we're going to have a bit of an executive summary on everything that we noticed in terms of the audit and the governance and controls so that you understand where this presentation is headed. So first, we found that there's a very high audit risk due to a lot of changes in management, complex transactions, and other issues related to the audit. For approach, we believe that a fully substantive approach is necessary. And considering the timeline, we have 1.5 months to submit the report to the government. This is going to require a lot of resources. For materiality, we believe it should be 95,000. We base this on a percentage of revenues because that's a critical account for the government, which is the primary user. And now moving on, we notice that there's a bias to overstate expenses. Because should MK overstate expenses, it will receive larger grants. So we have to pay special attention to these accounts going forward. What's more, for controls, there is a high control risk. The control environment has a lot of room for improvement, which we will provide suggestions for shortly. For practices, we believe that a more active role is needed by the governments of MK in order to realize its best financial goals and have the best result for the community at TriSister. So moving forward, we believe that the standard that they follow should be ASPE, and that management has had a lot of changes. So we know that this requires a lot of careful attention. Specifically for the accounting, I'm going to pass you the floor to Sohel to provide to you all the details.
Thank you, Richard. So first of all, we looked at the government grants. So basically, MK was awarded with a $1.35 million grant by ENAC for a period of 3 years. So we went under the assumption that this is a company, but we could look at it from an NPO perspective in the Q&A section as well. So this is covered under section 3800. Basically, you have 3 ways to recognize government grants, which are for current expenses, future expenses, or as an expenditure. When we looked at the situation, the grant was really allocated to MK to really maintain and develop current services in the community. So under this case, the recommendation is to recognize only 1/3 of the grant as it has only fulfilled part of the 3 years. Only so there's a reversal required under the grant. So this is the journal to correct this situation. Also, for the sports complex, all of the expenses, well, all the expenditures were expensed in the income statement for a total of $202,000. So looking at the section 3061, which covers PP&E, the costs can either include the purchase price as well as the non-refundable duties and taxes, or the cost to get the assets ready for use. So when we look at the expenditures, it was mainly used to develop the plans, build the foundation, and all these costs to get really the complex ready for use. So these are directly attributable to the sports complex. This means that it should be capitalized. So this will have a positive impact on the bottom line, which will need to increase. The correcting entry will be as follows. Then we have the lease contract. So the lease contract is basically MK needed snow removers. So they signed a contract for 6 years where they pay $25,000 based on a monthly payment, so $25,000 divided by 12. Currently what they did is that they expensed the whole thing to their income statement at the price of $25,000. Now section 3065 look at leases. So basically we have to look if this is a finance lease or an operation lease. 3 criteria are really important in the ASPE. So we have to look at if there's a transfer of ownership. They have to pay the guaranteed value of $50,000, but there's no clear statement where if the asset are transferred or not. Then substantial life of the asset. We saw that usually this asset could last for 8 years, whereas they have signed for 6, which represents 75% of useful life, which is enough to capitalize it. But we also looked at the value of asset just to make sure. So we calculated the PV of the payments and the guaranteed value, which gave us 93% of the current fair market value of the asset. So under these criteria, we can conclude that this should be recorded as a finance lease. So to correctly capitalize the amount, they should record a lease asset, which then should be depreciated here, and we also have to record an interest expense for the lease obligation. So to correct their balance sheet and their income statement, they should record this and take the $25,000 which was expensed and deducted from the lease obligation. So we also saw that there was an outstanding accounts receivable, which was from the old chief sister. We saw that it was outstanding by $90,000, 90 days, sorry. So this is a financial instrument, but looking at it more specifically, it's not an accounts receivable, it's a loan receivable, because this is not something to generate revenue. It was a loan made to his sister. So under financial instruments, it should be held at cost minus any impairments. So we should make a test to see if there's any recoverability or if the asset should be impaired down. And we also need to take a proper look at the accounts receivable, because the fact that it wasn't impaired means that there might be some other accounts receivable on the balance sheet which might need impairments. So we also had a few smaller other considerations. So basically, the expenses, what's happening is that Jerome records the expenses as they receive the invoices. So there's not proper authorization to see if these invoices were in fact for MK. So we should really ensure that the matching principle is installed in the company, so the expenses are really for the revenue generated. Then we also saw that the salary expense was really allocated to different type of expense on the income statement, and we believe that it should have its own line on the income statement, as it is a substantial amount of all the expenses incurred by the company. So as you can see here, we made all the corrections on the income statement, and their loss are bigger than it was before at $4.9 million approximately. So this will give us further funding. And as you can see, after applying the correct ASPE standard, we can see that the loss is increased by $700,000. So now my colleague Abrar will go with the audit planning procedures.
Thank you, Richard. So now that we've identified all the financial reporting issues, let's see how those would affect our audit risk. So as mentioned by my colleague Richard, the audit risk is high. There's a lot of complications in the company, which I will go over right now. So first, there was a change in management. So there was a new chief set in place, and as well there was a new director of finance, and as well there was a new governing director, which would increase our audit risk. Then we don't have the important stakeholders. So the government is highly relying on our audited financial statements in order for them to use for their funding to fund MK. Then there's also the fact there's an underqualified staff. So some staff right now have been incorrectly expensing some amounts without proper justification. So that also increases our inherent risk. So what is the key takeaway from this? In addition to the fact that this is a first time auditing MK, we need as well assurances on the opening balances. Given that it's a first time audit with them, to get assurances on their opening balances, we would look at contacting their previous auditors. Other considerations which are more resource related. So currently right now, there's a time gap. We only have 1.5 months until these audit reports are being demanded by the government. So it puts a burden on us as the auditors to ask ourselves, do we have the staff and the resources needed in order to complete this audit on time with the quality work done? As well, there's some complex transactions. As mentioned by Sohail, there are leases in place. There's also improper capitalization of buildings and assets. So that is something we have to take into account as well. And lastly, we have a heavy workload. The previous auditor actually resigned over the fact that this was a heavy burden audit, and they backed out of the audit. So as the auditors of MK, we have to make sure that we're able to handle all this workload. So key takeaway is this, that we'll need assurance of an appropriate staffing consideration, considering the time frame and workload of this audit. So we want to avoid a scope limitation as an opinion. Now let's look into the fact that there's a need for a substantive approach. Why? We've looked at the controls right now, and there are several weaknesses which we'll go into a little later on. So control risk is high right now because the control objectives are not being met. So therefore we cannot rely on those controls as a way to audit, and then finally we would have to adopt a fully substantive approach. And the reason why these controls are not effective is because, as we're going to present to you now, there have been a lot of faults with them. So specifically, which we'll look into later slide. But before we can do that, let's look at materiality. So right now there's two core users of the statements. As mentioned, there's the government and as well as the company itself. The government needs to make sure that their MK is properly allocating this revenues into the business, and as well there's the actual company itself, MK, which needs us for accurate and timely information. So based primarily on our primary user of the government, and given the fact that revenue is an important account for them to make sure that they're properly allocating that revenue, we decided to go with revenue as our materiality base. And we chose 0.5% as our threshold, and we did this based on our adjusted materiality after all adjustment as mentioned by Sohail, and our adjusted revenue comes out to roughly 18.5 million. So 0.5% of that will give us an overall materiality of roughly 92,000, and as a performance materiality, we would have it set at 60% at 55,400. So once again, to reiterate, we would need to get assurances on the opening balances, and in order to do so, we would have to contact the previous auditors and get their documentation. And now I'll leave you with Richard, who's going to talk about exactly why we cannot fully rely on their controls.
So to talk about the audit procedure specifically, there are a few key accounts that we really want to ensure that we have the proper valuation and the proper existence, or just that they've met their requirements and are actually accurately reporting this information so that the government could rely on them and we can give them a good quality opinion that's unqualified. So first, we notice the sports complex. Valuation and existence are at risk here because it's a big, big undertaking. They're going to construct this entirely new sports complex. And we really want to ensure that the asset is truly valued at what it is, because once again, there's a bias for them to overstate their expenditures to get higher grants. So first, we want to start by inspecting the asset itself, recalculation and amortization schedule, and make sure that it's properly capitalized in the account. Next, for revenue, there are a lot of grants, specifically the band support funding, which is going over 3 years. We want to ensure that's properly represented in the financial statements in terms of occurrence and cutoff. So we want to review the grant contract itself, recalculate any interest rates and procedures, and bank statements to check if the cash was actually received and went through the proper accounts. Furthermore, for leases, there are several snow removal machines. We want to check the valuation and rights of obligation by reviewing the lease agreement, inspecting the vehicles, making sure that they are in proper condition by reviewing maintenance contracts, and ensuring that they're properly valued once again. For expenses, we are concerned about payroll. This is a huge account that was not properly classified. So we want to check the accuracy and the occurrence and review timesheets, which are a significant control that we'll get to soon. What's more, bank reconciliation for the payroll bank account is critical, and having a separate payroll bank account is also very, very critical. So for the audit, we see that there's a large workload requiring a fully substantive approach. Now to get into our control suggestions. So the big weakness for controls in terms of the office location is unsecured premises. Anybody can walk into Jerome's office, it's unlocked, and modify any documentations, change accounting records. We believe that a locked door policy with proper user access is necessary for any keeping of financial records to ensure that nobody can modify the financial records after they've been submitted and that there's proper environment hygiene. What's more, there's unsupervised checks, which can lead to unauthorized payments. We believe that a numbered check system with a listing review that's happening frequently to ensure that no checks and erroneous payments are being made and that all checks can be accounted for is crucial. Moving on, we see that there's unsubmitted timesheets, and this leads to huge problems with this payroll account because we can't forecast how much people are actually going to have to pay payroll, how much they're actually working. It's causing issues and it's a lot of trouble right now. So we believe mandatory time checkout with a buffer day. So essentially you'll have 1 day to submit your, a strict day of the week to submit your timesheet, and you'll have a day to submit it, and if you don't submit it, there'll be penalties of some sort. So that encourages everybody to submit it on time because this is necessary for proper budgeting and it has to happen. What's more, there's authorizing expenses without justification at MK. Our client is at risk of having a lot of more expenditures than it needs to do, incurring unnecessary expenses. We believe that there should be an approval policy based on budget constraints. So there are a certain amount set aside for certain needs, and once those needs are needed, if they're within the budget constraint and within that percentage, they will be approved, but they have to be pre-approved and within the budget because we don't want to go over on expenditures at our client. Next, moving on to further weaknesses. We have too many individuals with the ability to approve checks, and the issue is not so much that there's too many individuals, but it's different individuals approving different checks, and there's no real common knowledge base going on as what's been approved, what hasn't been approved. Person A approves one check, and person B approves 2 other checks. He doesn't know about the first check that was approved by person A, and this lack of college knowledge base is creating a problem of understanding in general, understanding financial situation, what checks have approved, where's the budget at. We believe that having the Director General and Director of Finance both have to approve or both being able to approve checks specifically and having all of those checks go through them and their reports will ensure that there's an understanding of where the company is at, and if they're approving checks, they know exactly what the impact will be because there's communication and they understand the impact of that without having somebody else beforehand that is not regarded. And also, the easy accessible computer server is a huge risk. It's currently in the supply room, so it's unlocked and anybody can come in and they can potentially have a data breach or security issues that have occurred at many companies recently. Equifax, Deloitte have had security breaches, particularly their server. This is why we want a separate server room with only access to IT personnel, and we believe that a backup server at an offsite location is critical for this client because, once again, this information that's stored on these servers is critical, and it's very important to ensure that it cannot be lost. And the last control improvement we recommend is their invoice recording procedure. So right now there's unapproved expenditures that are being recorded by Jerome. And this is a danger because you're reporting something that could not be approved later, and you're not meeting the matching principle. So we believe that only recording invoices that have been incurred and that have been approved should be the new policy going forward for Jerome. And we believe something like current controls are not sufficient for the needs of MK, and they should be revised, and we should be testing that these controls have been revised and issuing a report to the Internal Controls Committee. So for control suggestions, we have provided a bunch of control deficiencies and their potential recommendations. For best practices in governance, I will leave the floor to Sohail to explain the situation.
Thank you, Richard. So basically, for an audit report, she wanted to know what level of audit we could, of assurance we could provide. So there's the compilation, review, and audit. So basically, the compilation and review wouldn't be sufficient for the current needs of MK. So basically, we need to explain to her that an audit is a positive assurance that we're testing. It's the highest level of assurance, and it is required by the government and provides the best assurance that she needs. We also have to walk her through what's going to be done without telling her necessarily the procedure, just the fact that we're testing the balance and such. So for the best practices, we looked at some of the key factors here. We saw that the Director General wasn't knowledgeable about his duties. What could happen here is that they couldn't fulfill his duties properly. So what we recommend is that there needs to be training that's implemented in the MK to ensure that everyone who's coming in a new role is trained properly. Also, Jerome provides really long debriefs. So what needs to happen here is that what happens is that there's an information overload and there's a lack of focus from the directors. So we need to provide they need to provide the executive an executive summary of the key issues, so it's easier to understand for the people. And now my colleague Abrar will continue with the rest of the best practices.
Perfect. Thank you, Scott. So just to continue on the list of practices that could be adopted by MK. Currently, right now, the officials are taking turns attending meetings. So what does that mean? There's a lack of consistency between the people attending the meetings. So the voice is not congruent. So how can they improve that? They would require non-attendees to at least read the meeting minutes at a minimum. As well, there's only 2 minutes a year. And what does that mean for MK? The fact that there's still going to be outstanding issues left unaddressed. So a way to mitigate that would be to require quarterly meetings with potential video conferencing if the attendee cannot come. And as well, doing so would increase MK's corporate governance. So the key takeaway from here is that they have the ability to practice their governance. Thank you.
Thank you.
You chose, I believe, the net loss for the materiality threshold, right?
Sorry?
You chose the net loss for materiality threshold?
Was revenue.
Revenue?
That was a typo at the beginning. We meant to say loss in the revenue.
Okay. I know the Department of INAC uses expenses to provide a subsidy. Would that be a good or better choice, maybe, choosing the materiality threshold?
It would be, but we have to look at the user needs. So yes, expenses is an important account, but as well, overall, the theme is the government is allocating them some revenues, and you want to see how exactly they manage those revenues affected to the company.
Okay.
Okay, knowing that the salaries are one of the biggest expense for MK, and maybe that you won't be able to base your work on the timesheets because of the lack of internal control. What kind of work could you do to lower the risk?
This involves looking at the time that the employee spends on the workplace, logging the hours, and seeing how much work it provides, how much we have paid him recently, looking at historical amounts, and verifying that is in line with the amount of time and the effort provided by this employee. If an employee claims he is working 50-hour weeks but only submits one Excel document that has 5 lines, we would want to verify that and make sure that he's actually doing the work that he's committed to doing, that he signed when he agreed to take the post.
And also, I'd like to know how would you recommend to record the grant related to the sports complex?
So if we continue with the assumption that it is a company, So once they receive the grant, it should be put as a receivable. And as they amortize the cost of the PP&E or the sports complex, they recognize the related revenue at the same time.
Okay. Any question? And I also like to know if you're comfortable with the fact that the Director of Human Resources hired the Director General.
Yes. This was after a very long process where there was no Director General. She hired a public worker who has the motivation to do well, just is not qualified to succeed at the moment. This is why we believe mandatory training will mediate the situation, and over time they'll become a very effective Director General.
Do you think that the council should have their say in who's hired for the DG?
This is an important consideration, given that the council is only meeting 2 times a week and they're not up to date on the particular situation. We believe that the human resource director was better situated and had a better understanding of who was needed for that position at the given time. And with the proper training, once again, we believe that the Director General will do an effective job and will satisfy the needs of the company.
Do you see the council building, what tools could they use to maybe give a framework for hiring people next time?
So basically, if it's for higher level management, they could have more frequent meetings or emergency meetings, as we can see with BOD for big corporations, to make sure that they elect the proper people to govern over the company.
In addition, a balanced scorecard could provide a general overview of all the important concerns for the company going forward to use at meetings as well. We believe that this would be a great part of the executive summary on the KPIs in terms of this balanced scorecard, how well is the company performing.
How do you summarize the role of the council in all this?
Their role is to really oversee the company and ensure that it's meeting its objectives for the community by providing these stadiums that are ensuring young people have an environment where they can succeed, where they're motivated to get up every morning and practice and really achieve something great. And we believe that they're on track to do that. They just need to fix a few things. And as our auditors, we're very happy to be able to help them with this.
We've seen a lot of deficiencies in MK. What are you thinking about the Director of Finance?
So at the moment, there might be some questions about his knowledge about accounting or if he's fit for the role. But again, with proper training, he might be able to do the correct job, or maybe he's overwhelmed. As we can see, there was a lot of issues with the timesheets, and the problem might just arise from the fact that he's overwhelmed and doesn't have the time to properly record all the transactions.
Thank you. That's it.
We don't have a lot of time. What do you think we should do with the bad debt that we have? It's been over a year. Should we write it off, or?
Initially, it should be evaluated, but most of the time with loans over a year, you should write it down for AR. But if it's really a loan which may generate interest, you can just leave it there and just charge the interest.
Thank you.
Thanks.